Hello and welcome to Marketing Communications. I'm Daniel Rahman. We live in an age of crisis, and communication is key in managing any crisis. With the rise of fake news, alternative facts, and the manipulation of data, if you fail to manage this complex web of challenges, you have failed to manage communications. Joining me today is Noordin Abdullah, the Managing Director of Glenrace Ndian Berhad and Crisis Management Center. In today's show, we'll be discussing crisis communications in the digital era. Noordin?
Hi Daniel, how are you?
Good, thank you. Are you ready to go?
All ready to go?
All right, so I'd like to start by saying that you were born in Australia and you've been in Malaysia and worked in around Asia for the last 25 years, many of which of this experience comes in the media, communications, marketing space. Tell us a bit more about your background and what drives you.
Okay, sure. I was fortunate enough to have a chance to live in Malaysia when my parents moved here many years ago. Worked with a few different international media houses, and then started our own media business, and then it developed into a communications business, and of late there's been, let's just say, plenty of crisis to manage, and I think looking at the opportunities, we decided to set up the Crisis Management Center to kind of take hold of that problem.
Right. So crisis is for you, but generally not good for everyone else. Why did you set up the Crisis Management Center?
Well, I think we looked at it as an opportunity to help individuals, corporations, and governments better manage the crisis that is hitting them. And we've seen of late, we live in the age of crisis, whether it's here in Malaysia, where I'm from in Australia, or the US, or wherever it is in the world. And it's something that if you manage well, you can actually come out on top.
But you often don't see in media plans a crisis communications element to it. People always talk about the marketing, the branding, the pitch, the angle.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I like to take from the wisdom of Mike Tyson.
Okay.
That's
an interesting wisdom there.
He said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And a crisis is very much a punch in the face.
Right.
And if you're not used to being hit, you often go down, to use a boxing analogy. And if you go down, can you get back up again?
Right. So why do you think that happens? Why is it that, people wait to get punched in the face in that sense?
Well, it's that same idea that, it will never happen to me.
Right.
That's something that always happens to other people. But nowadays, you've got to imagine there's so much competitive behavior going on that one of your competitors, whether it's in business or politics, is either looking for your next crisis to take advantage of, or trying to invent your next crisis and build your next crisis for you. And I think that's something that people need to be very much aware of.
Right. So in that sense, there could be people who are probably out to get you. It could be a trip in terms of something the company does, but it could have been something that goes viral out of nowhere on social media. What are the constituent elements of crisis communication?
Okay. For us, we've kind of broken it up into four areas. The first is data.
Data.
And that's kind of the most important. Most people don't have enough data, either about themselves or the industry or the area that they're in.
Right.
So they're in a sense running blind.
Okay.
The other one is you need to develop content. So have you developed content based on the data that is driving your business or your behavior? The other one is, are you communicating that to the right community? So you could be communicating to all kinds of people, but not the right people.
Right.
That are affected, or you want to be either happy with what you're doing or not.
Right. So it's not don't just preach to the converted. You have to go for the group which is probably saying these things about you or your brand or your organization. And what's the fourth?
And the fourth, then you get to the reputation part.
Right.
So you want your reputation to be good within the community. How does that community know that you're doing a good job? Is because of the content that they've just read. How do you know you produce the right content? Because you've listened. And this is the thing, that data operations is a listening exercise.
Right.
So a lot of people are here at communication where they say, oh, it's all about communicating.
Right.
So it's all about putting messages out there and saying things. But have you listened first that people want? What do people want to talk about?
Right. And usually, how would you measure the success of, once you go through data, content, community, and reputation, how does one measure whether it's effective or not?
Well, we were speaking before the show, and I think one of the things that, if you look at public listed companies, you can see it's very easy to measure. The share price will go up and down very quickly. In a crisis, you'll see a lot of public listed companies are very much affected very quickly. In a political sense, the problem is you only find out once every 4 or 5 years when there's an election, and that's often too late.
Right.
So you need to start listening now, solving the problems now for your stakeholders, and then communicating that you solved them.
Because once it's too late, then you either face some kind of financial loss or some kind of political loss.
Yes.
All right, Nordin, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back right after this.
No problem.
Hi and welcome back to Marketing Communications. With me is Nordin Abdullah, the Managing Director of Glenray Sdn Bhd and Crisis Management Centre. Today we're discussing crisis communications in the digital era. Nordin, in terms of the clients you've worked with, how ready do you think the corporate sector is when it comes to crisis communication? If there's a percentage you can give us.
We did a little bit of a survey, and we realized that more than 80% of CEOs realize that it's an area that needs to be addressed. Less than half of their managers have actually done any training.
Right.
So there's a massive gap. So it's a problem where you're leaving too much up to chance. And I think this is when you look at industry readiness.
Right.
A lot of people say, "Oh, our comms team will handle that."
Right.
But crisis communication is a very specific tool that you need to use, because communications people may be good at pushing out press releases, may be good at planning, may be good at doing things like that. But in the current media reality, everything is now.
Right.
Everything is now.
Right.
It's have you responded with Twitter? Can you respond with Twitter?
And would you say that digital media, i.e. social media, is the new battleground?
It's one of the battlegrounds. And I think this is also, people can make the mistake that they think they own this battleground, but then they get hammered in a different battleground. So actually you need to own all battle spaces. And it's really about, and we use the term battle space, because there's a lot of competitive behavior. Someone will attack you.
Right.
And you can see in a lot of recent crises in Malaysia, it can be fueled by other companies or other political people fueling the crisis. And we notice it comes down to who can communicate the most, who can communicate the best to the community, and did they listen? Right.
Is more always better though? Because sometimes people say that when there's a spark that gets lit on social media and there's all the trolling and all the virulence, it's better to keep quiet because it tends to go away in 3 days. People have short memory cycles as well.
It is a possible strategy. It works once in a while, but the problem is it doesn't work all the time, and will it work for you?
Right.
So the age of not communicating, I think, is long over. So if you don't have a plan to communicate, if you don't have a plan for success, you probably aren't going to succeed in a crisis.
Right. So speaking about planning for success and long term, I'd like to ask you a little bit about, you've got experience working with government organizations, and since May 2018, we've had a new government in place. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate the current government's performance with regards to their communication?
That's a good question. I think it's not whether you rate the entire government.
Right.
And I think that's a too broad an idea to try and rate everybody in the same basket. The question is, when we go back to our process, data, content, community. Now, people who are interested in a certain area, let's say the environment, that's a group and that's a community.
All right, so Mestec.
Yes.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
Well, they continue to communicate, and I think this is one area that we've seen a lot of communication come out of Mestec.
Right.
And I think if you look at, again, we go back to this process of understanding communities. Again, you can break up those communities, and Malaysia has a group of people who predominantly speak Malay, or predominantly speak Chinese, or prefer to communicate in English. And there's different media for that.
Right.
So you can communicate to different groups of people in different ways, but are you communicating effectively to that community group?
So speaking of communicating across the spectrum, recently there was a resignation by the Minister of Education, and one of the challenges that was flagged in the media, ironically, was that the media weren't highlighting the positives and rather focused on the smaller issues, or things which were not as important as to the real achievements. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, for me, every story, there's two sides to the story. There's this story that the people will have about the ministry or the minister. There's the story that the minister has about what he's doing in terms of policy and policy development. For me, both are correct. Right. So people, and I often get this wrong, even discussing with my wife. Right. She's telling me how she feels. Okay. I'm telling her facts. Right. Why are you not listening to my facts? Right. Because I'm not listening to how she feels. Right.
Humans are emotional creatures, as they would say.
Exactly. So again, if you go back to the first step of listening first, then it becomes easier to communicate, because you are communicating the messages that people want to hear. Right. The question for governments is, do you have the messages that people want to hear? Right. And in a situation that Malaysia is in right now, where there's a lot of rapid policy change and development, sometimes you just have to communicate what people don't want to hear, even though it's not popular.
So on that, communicating something that people want to hear, what's perhaps or certainly in the public interest, but people don't want to hear it because that's just how we are wired. What could MOE or generally the government have done better or do better?
I don't want to single out any single government or any single department, but what we all can do better is understand that communicating is an important element of your business plan, an important element of your delivery plan as government. So if you don't allocate budget, if you don't allocate resources, if you don't pay attention to communicating, it's very easy for it to become a crisis. Right. So the people in your communications team, how well trained are they? How well staffed are they? Do they understand what's going on a daily basis? Can they react before the 5 o'clock deadline, before the editor puts the news out? Or are you going to wait the next day and then you're already behind the 8 ball? So this is something that, these are small things that just need to be tweaked.
And so you're saying then that the government needs to be proactive, but they need to have a strong team around them. And at the same time, you do see that their communication efforts, but they need to be distinguished depending on the category. Now, we'll come back a little after this. We're going to take a short break right now.
Sure.
Welcome back to Marketing Communications. Today we are discussing crisis communications in the digital era. Nordin, earlier we're talking about government's efforts in communications, and I noticed that you are the Vice President of the Malaysian Cricket Association,
Yes.
which is associated with the Ministry of Youth and Sports, one of the most media-present organizations.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on the ministry's communication efforts?
Well, definitely, the minister is definitely someone who does well in front of the camera.
That's right, and very close to the camera as well.
Exactly, he has a reputation for being close to the camera, and
right.
But what is he doing? He's continually communicating in the very little time that he has as being a minister. He's like, okay, I'll just grab my phone and communicate. So sometimes it's that simple, and that's why sometimes the younger ministers you'll see quickly grabbing an opportunity to communicate, where the older generation will take a little bit longer and a little bit harder for them to embrace this younger in a sense younger technology.
Right. Do you think however that too much of responding too quickly is a good or bad thing? Do you have any experiences that you could share?
Again, if you're listening to what your community wants to hear, you'll understand the amount of what is too much and too little.
Right.
So I think you see different ministers criticized for not communicating enough,
right.
or some may be like, why does this guy keep talking about a certain
right.
subject? It may be because they're armed with the data
right.
Of the fact that this is what people want to know about in a crisis, for example, like floods, for example. People need to be updated all the time.
Right.
And I'm from Australia, and our experience there recently with the bushfires, and it's still going on.
Still ongoing. Yes. It's very unfortunate what's happening there.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the things that we realized in that crisis is, you, as the Prime Minister, he
right.
has to continue to communicate every single day.
Right.
People want updates. In that case, there's no over communication.
Right. So we've talked about industry, we've spoken a little bit about government, but there's also another very important stakeholder here, which are the media agencies, the journalists, the media practitioners themselves. Yes. I'm curious to know your thoughts. What about their responsibility in finding angles which are fair, and not always looking for the sensational angle?
Yes. Of course, media, very important element. Of course, a lot of changes in the Malaysian media lately.
That's right. More freedom, everyone's very excited by the possibilities, and I suppose then everyone's kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit?
I think so. But for me, everyone talks about their rights and their freedom, but there's also the media have a very important responsibility as that kind of fourth element of a society. And if you get it wrong as a media practitioner, it's very dangerous for someone's reputation. And sometimes the damage can be very severe. So I think for the media, they've got to get it right. A lot of people want the story, they want it now, they need to push something out before the news, they need to get something done. But at the same time, you've got to sometimes respect a family member or someone like this. So it's always going to be a give and take situation for the media.
Right. And the media doesn't like to be controlled or told what to do. We have to respect that freedom of expression, that space. But how would an organization, whether it's a company or government, engage with them better?
Well, I think the first thing is do you have the relationship with the media houses and the individuals themselves? It's very easy to have a conversation with someone as opposed to trying to dictate something or force an idea down someone's throat that you've never met before. So you wouldn't be rude or you wouldn't be forceful with someone that you knew.
Right.
So why would you do it with someone that you don't know? So the answer to the question is get to know the media better.
Is there anyone that you can think of who has very good media relations just by virtue of presence or how they have handled the media in the past?
I don't want to give any free publicity to anybody, but you see that in the Malaysian context, there's plenty of people who have very good media relations, and you can see that if you attend a press conference and if you meet some of the media, they're happy to discuss those people.
Right. Do you think we need a media council? Because that's a big conversation now happening. They have equivalents of like the FCC in the US. They've got a watchdog in the UK. What are your thoughts on something of that sort in Malaysia?
It's definitely something that's been talked about a lot lately. I think as Malaysia grows as a country, I think the more the world-class Malaysia becomes, the more Malaysia can decide on what's best that happens here in Malaysia. And I will leave that for some of the people in your next episode to talk about, I'm sure. Yeah.
Right. So last question, what do you see as key priority areas for the media space in 2020?
I think one is for media to start to understand this data and reputation cycle better.
Okay.
I think as the areas of ethics need to be managed.
That's interesting.
In reporting things that have happened on social media. So some media do report people's tweets.
Right.
Are they real people?
Right. Should they be reporting tweets?
Yeah, and has the media been manipulated by a fake
account or a fake narrative?
Or sometimes even I saw a recent case. People were reporting on WhatsApp news.
That's right.
And then it turns out not to be true. So we've got to just be careful not to get too excited, even though it's something that's going viral. How you report on it, and I think this is one area that maybe the Media Council can actually look at tackling.
Right. Nordin, thank you very much for your views and for your time. We've talked about data, we've talked about reputation management, content committee, and everything. It's been truly enlightening. That's all the time we have today. And thank you so much for those of you at home for joining us on Marketing Communications. Today we've discussed crisis communications in the digital era. Tune in next week, same time, same place on BERNAMA TV.